The Gerudo Training Ground is a bonus dungeon accessible after rescuing all the homosexual construction workers from Gerudo Fortress. Optional dungeons like this are a rarity among games in the Legend of Zelda series, depending on what you do and don't count. I don't want to get lost in definitions here, except to say that I'm not really talking about the bonus dungeons in Wind Waker or Twilight Princess, as those are straightforward combat gauntlets. Nor would I count anything in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom as a bonus dungeon, as those two shift the format so drastically that nearly everything is optional.
So, by my own metrics, the Gerudo Training Ground is a somewhat unique aspect of Ocarina of Time. There are a handful of other bonus dungeons similar to it, but those are found in smaller titles in the series, which isn't something I say as a judgment of worth, just as an acknowledgement that the remakes and the original games released for handheld consoles had smaller budgets, smaller development teams, and shorter development times. A bonus dungeon, even a small one, is a much greater commitment of resources in a fully three-dimensional game, which makes Ocarina of Time's bonus dungeon all the more special. Special, yes, but also easy to overlook. When you impress the Gerudo thieves with your thieving skills and they give you the Gerudo membership card, they just vaguely allude to you having access to all the different areas of their fortress. One of those areas houses the horseback archery minigame. A pretty big segment of the overworld map is dedicated to it, and it has this enticing dog bone shape that really draws attention. If you, much like a dog, go after this dog bone shape, you will find a simple but incredibly aggravating shooting gallery minigame. You would be forgiven for missing a small, unassuming gate at the foot of the hill, which, in actuality, leads to an elaborate dungeon. I won't go in depth on the individual rooms of the Gerudo Training Ground, but let me summarize them. It consists of 11 rooms laid out in a 3x3 grid with 2 additional rooms extending out of the top left and middle right blocks. The first room is the entrance, which features no major challenges. The entrance splits to the left, center, and right, with each door framed by the head of a stone lion, one of several impressive art assets unique to this bonus dungeon. The center path leads to the central room of the bonus dungeon, a maze of locked doors. The Gerudo Training Ground has 9 keys in total, and the center of the locked door maze can technically be reached with as few as 7 of them. The left and right paths each lead to timed combat challenges, with the one on the left taking place in a really unique, interesting arena that resembles a rock garden, and the one on the right taking place in an arena that is pretty unremarkable by comparison. Moving north, the center left and center right rooms are both Silver Rupee action puzzle platforming challenges, with the center left room being a maze with firewalls and rolling boulder traps, and the center right room consisting of a few small platforms sticking out of a lava pit. The lava pit room connects on its right side to the first of the 2 rooms that break out of the 3x3 grid. In this case, it's a room with a big pool of water where some clam monsters, called shell blades, guard a few silver rupees. Moving north from the Silver Rupee maze and the Silver Rupee lava pit rooms, we have the rooms on the top left and top right of the grid, which both feature simple hidden object puzzles. The top left room connects to the second room that breaks out of the 3x3 grid, and again the goal is to find a cleverly hidden object. Finally, the top center room is a sort of shooting gallery involving a statue and a rotating platform suspended over, you guessed it, red-hot lava.
These challenges are in keeping with the general vibe of Ocarina of Time's Silver Rupee arc. As I've alluded to earlier, developer interviews will back me up when I say that this portion of the game is when you can tell that dungeons are being made on the fly, with individual room-based challenges being thrown in wherever the developers needed to fill in space, with less regard to creating consistent or coherent mechanical themes. Why is it that the forest-themed section of the dungeon inside Ganon's castle features the fans, whose only other appearance is a single room in the Shadow Temple? Why is it that the Shadow Temple and the Ice Cavern share the spinning scythe trap? What is with that room in the Spirit Temple with all the fake doors and the torch slugs, and so on and so forth?
The Gerudo Training Ground feels like a dungeon made entirely out of the missing parts of other dungeons, but I think that mostly works to its benefit. The rest of the dungeons in this game have some kind of in-universe purpose aside from being a set of challenges for the player to complete, even if that purpose is unclear. In the universe of Ocarina of Time, the Forest Temple isn't a video game dungeon. It's a mansion that's become haunted after years of neglect. The Ice Cavern isn't a collection of simple puzzle platforming challenges, it's a natural cave. Even the Shadow Temple is alluding to things like catacombs and supernatural underworlds. As players, we see video game dungeons filled with video game mechanics, with the understanding that this isn't a completely literal depiction of a place within the setting. Unlike those other dungeons, though, the Gerudo Training Ground is a space that is explicitly supposed to be an obstacle course, so in that sense it can get away with a haphazard silver rupee arc style of design. But that kind of sells this bonus dungeon short, because there is a lot of solid design happening here that helps to create a sense of thematic cohesion between all its regimented challenges. Even though the player isn't given a map and compass, the grid-like structure of the Gerudo Training Ground gives the space an understandable shape. This grid-like structure also helps convey the theme of a deliberately constructed obstacle course. The other dungeons are more misshapen, more elongated. They don't feel as rigid and segmented as the Gerudo Training Ground does. The bonus dungeon has an intuitive sense of symmetry, which is apparent right from the beginning with the two parallel combat rooms, and is then reinforced with the two parallel silver rupee rooms. But it also isn't thoughtlessly bound to upholding this symmetry, as there are little variations, like with the two rooms that don't fit in the grid, or how the rooms on the right take the player down, while the rooms on the left take the player up, so that when the two paths converge in the room with the statue shooting gallery, one path is overlooking the other. If I were to go over the design ideas of the Gerudo Training Ground in more depth, I would end up restating a lot of what I said when I was talking about the Spirit Temple. Indeed, I think that main dungeon and this bonus dungeon are different inflections of the same idea of testing the player's accumulated skills and knowledge. This similarity is appropriate, on the one hand, given their geographic and cultural proximity in the world of the game, but also doesn't feel redundant because the Gerudo Training Ground has a unique structure that helps it stand apart from the Spirit Temple. The locked door maze in the center of the 3x3 grid is the best example of this. Unlike a conventional Legend of Zelda dungeon, there is no boss fight here. This central maze is the bonus dungeon's final challenge. As I mentioned earlier, only 7 of the 9 keys are necessary for obtaining every item in the central maze. You could view this in one of two ways. You could view the 2 unnecessary keys as a way of granting a little bit of leeway, allowing you to avoid dealing with 1 or 2 of the bonus dungeon's challenges. Or you could see the 2 unnecessary locked doors as a trap that wastes your hard-earned keys and keeps you in the bonus dungeon a bit longer. Either way, this slightly looser approach to locks and keys is unique among Ocarina of Time's dungeons. You use up the keys, and the maze gives various small rewards, some rupees, some arrows, some bomb chews, until finally arriving at the main event, the big bonus item, the ice arrow. It is pretty underwhelming, not because ice arrows are inherently uninteresting items. They're used pretty solidly in Majora's Mask and Wind Waker, for example, But here in Ocarina of Time, they hadn't quite figured out how to make them work, so they had to just be a little bonus curiosity, instead of being necessary to complete the game like the light arrow, or consistently helpful like the fire arrow. Lucky for me then, that I do this more for the love of the game than any strategic reason. The real reward of the Gerudo Training Ground is that it fills out that tantalizing final square on the select item subscreen. Sure, you can beat the game with just your normal arrows and your yellow arrows, but it is so much more satisfying to have those red and blue arrows too. You gotta get all three of those primary colors. There's a concept in game design of extrinsic versus intrinsic rewards. So, for example, every time you defeat a boss in Ocarina of Time, you gain a heart container that adds a single heart icon to your life meter. That is an extrinsic reward. If you were to defeat a boss without taking any damage, the game wouldn't acknowledge it in any way, but you would probably personally find satisfaction in exhibiting your skill. That satisfaction is an intrinsic reward. So you could look at the Gerudo Training Ground in those terms. Is the process of completing this bonus dungeon intrinsically rewarding? Would I enjoy it if there was no reward at the very end? It's probably pretty clear, based on everything I've said so far, that my answer is yes, but I'm not sure it's quite that simple, because a reward isn't something that you can necessarily isolate from the steps required to obtain it. Let me explain. If, instead of the ice arrow, the reward for completing the Gerudo Training Ground was a single green rupee, would it still count as a reward? What if we took it a step further? What if Link opened the treasure chest at the center of the locked door maze and found nothing at all? Or, taken even a step further, what if there was just a conspicuously empty space? No treasure chest or anything. Now, all three of those possibilities are functionally identical. They are, at most, different versions of the same joke, subverting the expectation of a useful reward. Furthermore, the only difference between those three alternative possibilities and the way the game actually works is that, useless as the ice arrow may be, it doesn't come across as a joke. The structure of a Legend of Zelda dungeon implies some kind of reward for completion, and any reward up to and including literally nothing is going to fill that role, in much the same way that hanging a frame on the wall creates a work of art. To put it another way, it doesn't make much sense to ask if the act of completing a Legend of Zelda dungeon is intrinsically or extrinsically rewarding, because completing dungeons is what these games are. Likewise, even if you zoomed in a bit, it wouldn't make sense to ask if the actions required to obtain keys and dungeon items are intrinsically rewarding, because keys and dungeon items are just fundamental constitutive elements of the way dungeons are designed.
I didn't say any of that because there is an epidemic of people using an ill-fitting intrinsic-extrinsic reward framework to analyze Ocarina of Time's dungeons. Rather, I'm just trying to express what I mean when I say that these kinds of broad frameworks aren't always relevant, or that they sometimes work in unintuitive ways.
Take a game like Spyro the Dragon. This is what is referred to as a collectathon. This is a style of game that's about collecting various items. There are several different collectibles in Spyro the Dragon, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll just talk about gems. Gems are lying around everywhere, often in plain view, but also hidden away, serving as rewards for diligent exploration. Enemies drop them too, so collecting every gem in a level inevitably means defeating every enemy in that level. If you took the gems out of Spyro the Dragon, you would have, in my opinion, a much weaker game. You could say this is because the satisfaction of collecting shiny objects is propping up weak platforming mechanics, but I don't agree with that framing. No, it would be a weaker game because the satisfaction of collecting shiny objects is simply a fundamental part of the game's appeal, every bit as intrinsic as running, jumping, charging, gliding, and blowing fire. Now, I would not describe any game in the Legend of Zelda series as a collectathon, but they often draw upon that same kind of appeal, Ocarina of Time in particular. Obviously, Link obtains various items and equipment and picks up plenty of shiny gems of his own. Those aren't what I'm talking about here. Ocarina of Time features 2 major collection side quests, obtaining all 100 gold Skulltula tokens and all 36 pieces of heart. I enjoy both of these side quests, not because they offer any particularly interesting set pieces, and certainly not because their rewards are useful, but because they provide a framework for spending time with the game and engaging with it at a different pace than you would find strictly following the main story.
I won't go in any kind of depth about the experience of collecting all 136 of these collectibles, because it would push me off the precipice of madness. Suffice to say, while there are certainly a lot of things to collect, and even though not every one of them is placed in an interesting way, it never feels like there are so many that the game is simply wasting your time, and their placement never feels arbitrary. There's always some attempt to create a meaningful miniature challenge or miniature story. It's not about shaking every tree and sticking your nose in every corner. It's about getting acquainted with the general logic of where and how this game likes to hide things.
I think Ocarina of Time does a good job giving its collectibles a sense of place and belonging. Gold Skulltulas make a distinctive scratching sound when you're near them that usually makes them easy to locate, especially if you're making use of stereo or surround sound, and as long as you're not deaf. Many of them only appear at night, which suits their creepy aesthetic. Gold Skulltulas are creepy spiders with an appropriately creepy purpose. They're a manifestation of a curse on a family of a father and his 5 adult sons, who have been cursed into becoming horrific human spider hybrids. Cursed members of the family drop from the ceiling of their dark, musty home, just like a big Skulltula would, but the biggest danger they bring is the threat of a guilt trip after you impulsively whack them with your sword. You break the curse on one of the sons every time you obtain 10 gold Skulltula tokens, so it only takes 50 gold Skulltulas to help all 5 of the adult sons. At this point, their father, who's still under the curse, seems mostly satisfied, implicitly giving the player permission to not worry too much about finding the remaining 50 tokens necessary to break the curse on him, and, by extension, designating completion of the gold Skulltula side quest as the mark of being a truly dedicated Ocarina of Time player. Functionally, the game could have just had 6 treasure chests that are locked until you get 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and 100 gold Skulltula tokens, but the extra effort to attach a story to the collectible makes it much more memorable. I also appreciate the 2 steps necessary to deal with each spider. First, you destroy the spider, then you collect the token it leaves behind. There are a bunch of ways you can do both of these things, so it rarely feels like you have to go out of your way to dredge up a specific item from your inventory. I particularly enjoy finding ways to collect the tokens without using an item, by doing a backflip or jumping off of a ledge just right, and every sound effect involved in this process is divine, by the way. Pieces of heart have a different way of fitting into the game. Their presence has no in-universe explanation or purpose. They're purely a video game item, but they have a strong presence in the user interface, as the life meter is almost always visible in the top left corner of the screen. Every time 4 pieces of heart are obtained throughout the world, and every time a heart container is obtained after defeating a boss, the player is given immediate feedback on Link's increase in strength by seeing the number of heart icons increase. I am particularly fond of a tiny little graphic design decision that has been with the series since the first game. Once you've gotten enough hearts in your life meter, you get a second horizontal row of hearts, giving a much greater sense of weight than you would feel with just one extra long row, and it makes it even easier to get a general idea of the player's progress through the game with a single glance. It's important to note that neither of these side quests is presented to the player in an overbearing way. I already mentioned how the father of the cursed family tells you not to worry so much about him, but there's also the way that the gold Skulltula counter occupies a tiny part of the quest status subscreen. The gold Skulltula counter is positively dwarfed by the musical note icons marking the 12 Ocarina songs, by the icons of the 3 spiritual stones, by the icons of the 6 medallions, and, indeed, by the icon marking your progress collecting pieces of heart. The game's most involved side quest has inverse importance in the game's user interface. In fact, most of the user interface is dedicated to the items obtained over the normal course of completing the game. In the case of pieces of heart, it's a little trickier to explain what I mean. You start with 3 hearts, and you need to get 8 more heart containers to reach the second row. I would argue that this 11th heart contributes the greatest sense of increased power, so it's fortunate that there are exactly 8 heart containers in the game, given after all 8 of the main boss fights. A typical player, that is, one who doesn't deliberately avoid collecting additional heart containers, is guaranteed to reach the most important heart-related milestone by the end of the game. And while it takes 4 pieces of heart to equal a single heart container, even a casual player will likely collect enough over the course of the game to get another heart at least once or twice. Similarly, while there are plenty of well-hidden gold Skulltulas, there are enough of them placed in obvious locations to obtain the most important rewards.
Gold Skulltula tokens and pieces of heart are the game's 2 major optional collection side quests, but there are a few other side quests, and all the same, the primary benefit of completing these is the simple satisfaction of completing a set of tasks.
But I find that these side quests are a notable place where the game starts to lose my interest. It is, of course, one of the great instances of understated video game comedy that empty bottles are such a rare and precious resource in the Legend of Zelda series, but the side quest to collect all 4 of Ocarina of Time's empty bottles never quite finds its footing. One of the bottles is obtained in the course of the main quest. One of them is granted for completing a simple minigame involving catching a special cuckoo out of a crowd of normal cuckoos. One of them is granted for finding all 7 of the Cuckoo Lady's missing cuckoos. Those 3 are obtained when Link is a child. The final one is granted for hunting down and capturing all 10 of the big Poes hiding around Hyrule Field when Link is an adult. The last one is a big jump in terms of difficulty. Really, difficulty is a generous way of putting it. Hunting the big Poes is a big pain in the ass. I can sympathize with the intent. They had a whole horseback archery system designed, and this is the only place, outside of the minigame in Gerudo Fortress, where it can get any use. So I can forgive the clunkiness and all the annoyances involved in capturing the big Poes, but I just don't think the final empty bottle makes sense as a reward. The next big reward category is capacity upgrades. You can upgrade the carrying capacity for Deku seeds, Deku nuts, Deku sticks,
bombs,
and arrows twice each. Of these 10 upgrades, 2 of them are bought in hidden shops, 4 of them are obtained through minor tasks, and 4 of them are rewards for annoying minigames. To echo something I said about the Shadow Temple, it's repetitive without being focused and inconsistent without being varied, and it just altogether feels like too much of the game's reward economy is dedicated to these. Speaking of the economy, I suppose the wallet upgrades fare a little bit better. Your starting wallet can only hold 99 rupees. After collecting 10 gold Skulltula tokens, you get a wallet that can hold 200 rupees. After collecting 30 gold Skulltula tokens, you get a wallet that can hold 500 rupees. Money is mostly useless in this game, so the primary benefit of these wallet upgrades is that for a short amount of time after you obtain them, you'll be able to experience the joy of seeing your number of rupees go up again, until you inevitably reach the limit after an hour or 2. The useless money is a problem in its own right, but also problematic is the fact that the limited wallet capacity feels like a limit for its own sake, just to justify having a different thing to reward the player with. But I will at least give credit where it's due. I appreciate that you get both of these upgrades in the same way, and I appreciate that because the rupee counter is almost always visible in the bottom left corner of the screen, these upgrades feel more tangible than the other carrying capacity upgrades. The next category of rewards involve the Great Fairy Fountains. There are 6 in total, and each of them houses a giant, nearly naked woman with pointy boobs. 3 of them grant magic spells: Din's Fire, Varor's Wind, and Nehru's Love. One of them grants you a magic meter that is used to fuel spells and various other things. Another doubles the size of the magic meter, and the final grants a boost to your defense that effectively doubles your life meter, represented by a white outline surrounding every heart icon. The placement of the Great Fairy Fountains strikes me as a little strange for world-building reasons that I don't feel like getting into, and the way they fit into the game's progression is a mixed bag. 2 of these Great Fairy Fountains are necessary for completing the game. 2 of them grant technically optional but very helpful upgrades, and the remaining 2 grant 2 spells that are, if I'm being generous, situationally useful. 3 of the 4 optional fountains are quite easy to miss, but the most useful of them all is the easiest of them all to find. Just look for the big black pillar. Still, I appreciate what they add to the game in the broad strokes, the feeling of having a divine benefactor, and in some of the little details, like the way they change the appearance of the user interface. What else am I missing? There's the silver scale, which is required to complete the game, and then there's the golden scale, which is optional. These items increase Link's almost entirely useless diving ability. You get the golden scale for catching a big fish in the fishing minigame, a minigame that I think is pretty good for what it is, but won't be discussing in any kind of depth. There's the Happy Mask Salesman side quest that has a few cute character interactions and eventually rewards Child Link with the ability to wear different masks that grant various minor benefits, in particular the ability to hear the little tidbits of world building whispered out by gossip stones. There is also, of course, the sequence of trades and timed deliveries that eventually leads to the Big Oron sword, a big 2-handed blade that might have less sacred power than the Master Sword, but more than makes up for it in terms of regular power.
Ocarina of Time has a relatively small amount of side quests, and I wouldn't say this is a matter of quality over quantity, as none of these side quests stands out as particularly well designed, but their effect in total is to richen the experience of Ocarina of Time. This is a difficult thing to justify in a formalist sense, but the relatively small amount of side quests in Ocarina of Time inherently helps to elevate otherwise banal gameplay. There's a greater sense of a curated experience.
A player's experience of a game isn't just what they played, but also all the aspects of a game that they're aware of. Even though I've never beaten Gerudo horseback archery without cheating, I still have a relationship with that part of the game, and a solid understanding of how it fits into the overall experience, even if the effect of that is just that I have consciously decided that I don't want to deal with it. Earlier, I talked about intrinsic and extrinsic rewards, and let me finally fully articulate why I feel that's relevant. I find the process of completing a game's side quests to be intrinsically rewarding, but I have limits. Games with an overwhelming amount of side quests, like indeed the 2 most recent Legend of Zelda games, inherently frustrate me, even if all the side quests are good. There is a value to that style of design, don't misunderstand me, but there's also a value to limiting the amount of content as well. Less, as the saying goes, truly can be more, and this is true even if a deficit in quantity isn't made up for in quality. That being said, even as much as I can derive an intrinsic satisfaction from completing these side quests, Ocarina of Time's reward economy is noticeably strained under the weight of even this modest amount of side content. As I already mentioned, there are 10 upgrades to ammo carrying capacity, and every single one of them feels like a waste of time. When I look at the totality of the upgrades available in Ocarina of Time, by which I mean not just the ones obtained in side quests, but also necessary items like the Silver Scale or the Mirror Shield, I start to see more signs of Ocarina of Time's indecision. The original Legend of Zelda, released for the Famicom and the NES, was one of many early attempts at merging the action gameplay of console games with role-playing elements found in computer games. Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, was a very different approach to the same general idea, whereas The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, released on the Super Famicom and Super Nintendo, evolves the ideas of the original game, also adding in more elements of adventure game style puzzle solving and story-based progression. Ocarina of Time's immediate predecessor, Link's Awakening, released for the Game Boy, plays pretty similarly to A Link to the Past, but strips out a lot of the action and the RPG in favor of focusing on the main quest, making a big move in the direction of being a story-driven adventure game. Other than Zelda 2, the Legend of Zelda series incorporates RPG elements not through experience points and character statistics, but through items found in the world. In the original Legend of Zelda, Link wouldn't directly upgrade his strength and his defense. He would find a better sword and a magical ring of protection. A Link to the Past would build on this slightly. Now, instead of 3 different levels of sword power, there are 4. Instead of 1 power bracelet for moving rocks, there's the Power Glove and the upgraded Titan's Mitt. In theory, Ocarina of Time is a further expansion on this item-based approach to role-playing game elements that also expounds on the action elements, adding in more layers of player decision-making. There are 3 different shields, tunics, and pairs of boots, each with their own benefits and drawbacks. We're back down to 3 levels of sword power again, but this time you can actively switch between your different swords. You also have other melee weapons, the Megaton Hammer, which is more viable as a general-purpose weapon than the hammer was in A Link to the Past, as well as Deku Sticks, which are quick and powerful but break after a single use. There's the same amount of magic spells as there were in A Link to the Past, but there are also 3 elemental effects you can add to arrows. There are also 2 types of bombs. Even with straightforward upgrades, there's more to deal with. This time, instead of just a Power Glove and a Titan's Mitt, there's a Power Bracelet, Silver Gauntlets, and Gold Gauntlets. Instead of needing Zora Flippers to swim, Link can swim right from the start, and you upgrade his diving ability with a Silver Scale and a Golden Scale. And so much of Link's shit needs to have its carrying capacity upgraded. That being said, despite the addition of all these elements of progression and choice, Ocarina of Time, in practice, manages to converge on the same general feeling as the stripped-down Link's Awakening, even though they were developed by almost completely different groups of people with very different ideas. That is to say, Ocarina of Time is a big step away from action RPG and towards action-adventure, with subsequent games in the series increasingly focusing on the adventure side. This shift in feeling comes from a complex combination of factors. For the sake of this analysis of Ocarina of Time, let me define an action RPG as a game that uses real-time, reflex-based challenges combined with resource management and character upgrade systems. In order to figure out why Ocarina of Time feels so different from its action RPG predecessors, it helps to take a step back and examine A Link to the Past, and ask how similar it really is to the 2 games that preceded it. Sure, Zelda 2's status as the black sheep of the series is well known, but for as different as the first 2 Legend of Zelda games are, they both use combat as a primary source of challenge. Enemies are hard to hit and deal a lot of damage. All of Link's options for offense, defense, and recovery come with interesting trade-offs, whether by opening him up to risk, by draining from a limited pool of resources, or by taking a lot of time. A Link to the Past chips away at this on every level. Enemies become easier to hit and deal less damage. Link's movement becomes more agile, while his attacks become more versatile and less risky. All resources become more plentiful. This reduction in combat difficulty is combined with an increasing focus on navigational challenge, puzzle solving, and storytelling. Ocarina of Time in many ways continues that process from A Link to the Past, and so feels even further from being an action RPG. I would also contend, though, that a key factor is that Ocarina of Time implements action RPG elements in a haphazard, inconsistent way. The different tunics and boots you acquire in A Link to the Past are, functionally, a completely different mechanic to the different tunics and boots you get in Ocarina of Time. In A Link to the Past, there is no way to switch them out because there is no reason to. They're all simple, direct upgrades with no drawbacks. Meanwhile, Ocarina of Time's version gives you a choice, but it's never a complex one. It's never a matter of risk and reward. If you're in a volcano, put on the red shirt. If you need to sink underwater, put on the shoes that make you heavy, then the shirt that lets you breathe underwater. If you need some extra hang time to clear a gap, put on the shoes that make you hover. But those shoes suck for everything else, so you usually want your normal shoes on. As an element of the adventure gameplay, it's all functional, but it's not an interesting element of choice. So, while Ocarina of Time is, overall, developing the ideas expressed in A Link to the Past, their respective implementations of action RPG elements are often quite different, superficially similar but unrelated in any functional sense. Compared to tunics and boots, the choice between swords and shields is a bit more dynamic, but only Child Link ever has to make a meaningful choice between the two shields available to him, and only Adult Link can switch between the two swords available to him. So there isn't much variety, and what variety is present has to be rationed out between Link's child and adult forms. I do actually think that Child Link's choice between using the powerful, limited Deku sticks and the weaker, unbreakable Kokiri sword is an engaging one. That's just Child Link, though. Adult Link has more choice of melee weapons to lesser effect. The Megaton Hammer is theoretically a viable alternative to the Master Sword, but it's way too slow and short range to use effectively. Meanwhile, once you get the Big Oron Sword, you can put away the Master Sword until the plot demands you use it again. The Big Oron Sword's increased range and power makes the trade-off of losing your shield almost completely irrelevant. Your other combat options are a mixed bag. The Slingshot and the Boomerang are items exclusive to Child Link. The Bow and the Hookshot are items exclusive to Adult Link. The Slingshot and Bow are fast and consume ammo, while the Boomerang and Hookshot are slow and have unlimited uses. The two sets of items aren't fully analogous, as all four of them have unique properties and interactions with different enemies that are clear at some times and unclear at others, and the combat scenarios available to Child Link never really give the Boomerang time to shine. But despite those points of inconsistency, I find that there is often a compelling, dynamic choice to be made for ranged combat. Deku Nuts are an item shared by Child Link and Adult Link. They're thrown at the ground like a flashbang, stunning every enemy within a certain radius. While they're limited in supply and, with a tiny handful of exceptions, never deal damage, they're quick and don't need to be aimed, which makes them very useful. Their ability to stun enemies is partially shared with the Boomerang and the Hookshot, which sometimes stun enemies instead of damaging them. The Slingshot, the Bow, the Boomerang, the Hookshot, and Deku Nuts are a collection of items that have some compelling dynamics between them. Meanwhile, Link's explosive options, both regular bombs and bomb chews, don't fare nearly as well. They both have some theoretical utility in combat, but they're so much more finicky than Link's primary melee and ranged options. After sinking a considerable amount of time into this game, I'm finally at a level of skill where bombs and bomb chews have become, at most, situationally useful. I struggle to imagine them being much more than that. Ocarina of Time shares certain items in common with A Link to the Past, like the bow, bombs, and hookshot, but using those items in Ocarina of Time's combat system feels completely different due to the new three-dimensional perspective. A Link to the Past was a lot snappier. You could, for example, drop bombs without breaking your stride. There isn't even an animation for it. You just press the button and the bomb appears. That kind of thing would look a lot stranger in a more realistic, fully three-dimensional game. So Ocarina of Time is, across the board, a slower and heavier experience. According to a developer interview, the game that set the foundation for Ocarina of Time's combat was actually Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, that infamous black sheep of the series, rather than A Link to the Past, the game that, in most other regards, defined how Legend of Zelda games would work. Where Ocarina of Time's combat differs from Zelda 2, and where it follows from A Link to the Past, is in how closely Ocarina of Time ties upgrades for Link's combat abilities to progression through the story. Most types of RPG maintain some degree of separation between character progression and story progression. Take, for example, the aforementioned Zelda 2, where, if you wanted to, you could defeat enemies in the opening area until you had enough experience points to max out your health, magic, and sword power. There are also important, incredibly useful upgrades like the sword techniques and certain spells that are blocked by progression through the story but are still optional and acquired through side quests. The most important, useful upgrades for Link's combat abilities found in A Link to the Past are found in dungeons, or otherwise directly alongside the game's critical path, and Ocarina of Time follows this example. While Ocarina of Time does contain a fair few upgrades that can be found somewhat independently of normal story progression, they don't create a meaningful difference in moment-to-moment gameplay. 2 of the elemental arrow types and 2 of the spells are optional. The ability to use the different types of arrow and the different spells is governed by the upgradable magic meter. This limitation, however, doesn't create a feeling of resource management. It mostly serves to discourage experimentation with the different magical effects, and upgrading the magic meter does little to change this feeling. In the case of the elemental arrows, few enemies react to them in interesting ways anyway. The spells are more diverse, but no more useful. Only one of the spells has any offensive utility, and it's quite limited. One of the spells is used for defense, but isn't practically useful. And the final spell is an exploration utility with no combat purpose at all. Between the limited magic meter and the limited pools of ammo for Deku sticks, Deku seeds, Deku nuts, arrows, bombs, and bomb chews, not to mention Link's health, resource management might seem to be a major concern. Theoretically, you're supposed to use your money at shops to replenish your resources. So, theoretically, the limitations on how much money Link can collect should be a point of pressure, and the upgrades in wallet capacity should relieve that pressure. But that's not the case. Shops appear in fixed, inconvenient locations, but jars and bushes, which can be destroyed to find nearly any supply you might need, are ubiquitous. Not only does this trivialize the value of money, it also trivializes the value of the ammo capacity upgrades. What I hope I've demonstrated through this lengthy explanation of some of the central mechanics of Ocarina of Time and its 4 predecessors is that even though Ocarina of Time, on paper, has many of the features that an action RPG would have, even though, on paper, it has the same features as its predecessors, which did feel like action RPGs, subtle changes in the specific ways those features are implemented add up to a more substantial change in feeling. Ocarina of Time doesn't feel like an action RPG. It feels like an adventure game with some decent action and some bizarre gestures in the direction of upgrade and resource management mechanics.
Ocarina of Time falters in its attempts to develop the action RPG elements of its predecessors. The adventure game elements, the elements used to tell a story, are developed much more effectively.
Ocarina of Time's style of storytelling is much more cinematic. The first 3 Legend of Zelda games had little interest and involved cutscene-centric storytelling. Link's Awakening leaned towards it in some key ways, and to great effect, but Ocarina of Time dives into it head first like a transsexual ninja trying to hide from his feelings towards a blonde twink. But the storytelling isn't just in the moments where the control is out of the player's hands. Items like the various masks and the Lens of Truth grant new ways of interacting with the world that are just as much about flavor and atmosphere as they are about gameplay utility. And that is before even getting to the ocarina, an item whose primary purpose is to cause scripted events to proceed in a way that feels organic and thematically interesting. The game feels like it's excited to show you all the stuff Link can do. You can see that clearly thanks to all the mini-games. There are a lot of mini-games in this one, 11 according to the Legend of Zelda wiki. What these mini-games demonstrate is not that this game has a really strong, expressive core set of mechanics, but that this game has mechanics that are versatile and can be used to credibly create a wide variety of situations. The hallmark of adventure games, according to Ian Danskin's video, Who Shot Guybrush Threepwood, is the way they use scripting and bespoke set pieces to create a wide variety of unique situations, instead of relying on dynamic systems that ultimately have a more limited output. Eventually, the Legend of Zelda series would shift its focus to creating some of the most intricate dynamic systems ever seen in any game, and in doing so, would move away from the action-adventure style back to the action RPG style, albeit as a very, very different kind kind of action RPG than it was in its early entries. Ocarina of Time was where that move to the action-adventure style started in earnest. Even still, Ocarina of Time is often an indecisive, transitional game, bounding into the future as it tries to bring the past with it, unsure where it's going while confidently moving forward. You can see that in the way it seems to want to cling to the action RPG roots of the series, and you can see that in the portion of the game that I refer to as the Silver Rupee arc, where its level design starts to get noticeably less consistent.
Even though the Silver Rupee arc encompasses the final third of the game, even though it's the note you leave on, it's the first 2/3 of the game that feel the most confident and forward-looking, and would set the course for the next few games in the series. And you can see that most clearly in the 2 dungeons I've not discussed in depth yet. It is finally time to talk about the dungeon inside Jabu Jabu's belly and the Water Temple.